I never imagined I'd be the guy looking through his wife's phone, searching for the truth he didn't want to find. That's the thing about trust. It's invisible, intangible, but you know when it's broken. It's like the room shifts, the air thickens, and suddenly everything you thought you knew feels wrong. We'd been together for 9 years. 9 years of shared dreams, 3 beautiful children, and countless plans for the future. I thought I knew who she was, who we were. We bought a house, got engaged, and settled into a life that, from the outside, looked picture perfect. But on the inside, it was rotting, and I was too blind or maybe too hopeful to see it. It wasn't like I didn't notice the changes, the quiet evenings where she'd retreat to her phone instead of talking to me, the late nights at work that stretched into early mornings. I told myself it was just stress. Raising 3 kids is hard. Managing a household is hard. Marriage is hard. Right? But that day, when her phone was sitting there on the bed, I had this overwhelming urge to look. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, but something told me I needed to know. Picked up her phone, and my heart raced. I'd never invaded her privacy before. I never wanted to be that guy. But when I unlocked it and scrolled through the messages, my entire world collapsed in seconds. There it was, a string of texts between her and another man, a married man with children of his own. It wasn't just flirty banter either. This was an affair that had been going on for months. Hotels, late-night meetups, lies upon lies that I had swallowed whole without question. My stomach twisted as I read their plans, their jokes, their twisted little world they had built on the ruins of our life. It hit me like a punch to the gut that this man, her affair partner, worked less than half a mile from our new apartment. That apartment, the one we'd moved to after selling our house, the one I was so reluctant to leave behind. I sold my home, left my good-paying job, all for what? To be closer to the man she was sneaking around with behind my back. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at her phone. Time stopped making sense. The person I had trusted with my life, the mother of my children, the woman I'd shared nearly a decade with, she was a stranger now. And that stranger had just burned my world to the ground. When she came home that night, I confronted her. I expected tears, guilt, maybe even anger, but what I didn't expect was her blank expression, the absence of remorse. She didn't deny it, not at all. Instead, she shrugged, like I had just discovered she'd forgotten to take out the trash. Her indifference was the final nail in the coffin of whatever we had left. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," she said, like her betrayal was a minor inconvenience for me, something I'd get over with time. "But I don't want to be with you anymore." Her words were cold, detached. I stood there, speechless, as she calmly laid out her plans for us to split. She didn't mention the kids, didn't seem to care about what this would do to them, to our family. It was all about her, her needs, her new life with him. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand answers, but all I could manage was a hollow why. She sighed, like I was being unreasonable. "We haven't been happy for a long time, you know that?" No, I didn't know that. I thought we were going through a rough patch, like every couple does. I thought we'd figure it out, that we'd come out stronger on the other side. But she had checked out long before I even realized there was a problem. She moved out the next day, taking the kids with her, and just like that, my life crumbled. I was left in an empty apartment, haunted by memories of a life I thought I understood. But the worst part was, she wasn't done with me yet. A few weeks later, I found myself standing on her doorstep, dropping off the kids after our agreed-upon visitation. She opened the door with that same distant look in her eyes, the one that told me she was already far away from me, even if she was standing right in front of me. "I'm seeing him," she said casually, like she was telling me she'd picked up a new hobby. "The guy I cheated on you with, we're together now." The words hit me harder than I expected. I knew it was coming, of course, but to hear her say it, to have her confirm that she had chosen him over me, over us, it broke something inside me. And then, as if she hadn't already shattered me enough, she added, "He's a good person. You just don't understand him." I wanted to laugh, to scream, to punch something. A good person? The man who destroyed 2 families, who abandoned his own kids, who lied to everyone who trusted him, he was a good person. What kind of twisted reality was she living in? But instead of lashing out, I did something I wasn't sure I could. I walked away. I got in my car and drove back to my empty apartment, trying to figure out how my life had turned into this nightmare. The woman I had loved for so long was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who didn't care about the wreckage she had left behind. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. It wasn't just the betrayal that weighed on me, though that was heavy enough. It was the complete upheaval of everything I thought I knew, the disintegration of the life I had built with her, and the endless questions that circled in my mind. I couldn't escape the torment. Was it my fault? Could I have prevented this? Was there something fundamentally wrong with me? I tried to stay busy. Every day became a marathon of distractions. I focused on work, drowned myself in projects, and spent every waking moment with the kids. I played the role of the engaged father, hoping that keeping my hands busy would keep my mind from wandering to darker places. But no matter what I did, the questions always crept in when I was alone. Nights were the worst. In the quiet darkness of my apartment, I felt the loneliness sink its claws into me. There in the stillness, I could hear my thoughts loud and clear. It wasn't just that she had betrayed me. It was that she had left me questioning everything about our life together. How long had it really been going on? Was it truly just a few months? Or had she been lying to me for years? Was she ever really in love with me? Or had I just been a convenient placeholder until something better came along? Every time I picked up the kids, the pain resurfaced. Dropping them off at her place meant seeing her again, knowing that her new life with him was moving forward while I was stuck here in the wreckage of what we used to be. Worse, she acted like none of it mattered, like she had simply moved on. There was no apology, no remorse. She looked right through me, like I was nothing but a shadow of her past, easily forgotten. The nights blurred together, one after another, each more difficult than the last. The anger began to mix with confusion, and I found myself cycling between the two emotions at lightning speed. Some days, I hated her with a rage I didn't know I was capable of. Other days, I felt pathetic, like I had somehow failed as a husband, as a father. Was it something I did that drove her into his arms? Or worse, was there something I didn't do? The bitterness ate at me, slowly sinking into my bones, hardening my heart. But alongside the anger was something I didn't expect, a persistent hope. As absurd as it seemed, part of me kept thinking maybe she'd come back. She'd text me every now and then, little things like, "I miss you," or a picture of one of our kids when they were younger, with a caption like, "Remember when things were good?" It was like she was throwing breadcrumbs my way, keeping me on the hook just enough to prevent me from moving on completely. Every time I got one of those messages, my heart ached. I knew I shouldn't respond. I knew it was just manipulation, another way for her to keep control over me. But I was weak. I would reply, telling her how much she'd hurt me, begging her to understand what she'd done to us. I'd ask her why? Why him? Why now? Why throw away everything we had for someone who'd betrayed his own family? Her responses were always the same. She'd brush me off, saying she didn't want to talk about it, that it wasn't fair for me to keep bringing up the past. She didn't see it as a betrayal anymore. In her mind, she had rewritten the story. We weren't happy. It wasn't working. "I'm not the villain here," she'd say. I think that's what hurt the most, the way she had completely absolved herself of any responsibility, as if our life together meant nothing, as if all the years we had shared had simply evaporated into thin air. She had rewritten our history, and I was just a footnote in her new chapter. The manipulation was subtle but effective. She'd pull me back in just enough to keep me tethered, never giving me closure. One minute, she'd be cold and distant. The next, she'd send a nostalgic text, reminding me of our shared memories, making it impossible to cut her out completely. I tried dating again, thinking it would help. I went on a few dates with women I met online, but my heart wasn't in it. How could it be? Every time I sat across from someone new, I felt like I was cheating on my own pain, betraying the part of me that was still so deeply connected to her. No matter how hard I tried to move forward, I kept getting pulled back, and the guilt of even attempting to rebuild my life gnawed at me. But then one day something clicked. I was sitting alone in my apartment, staring at yet another message from her. This one was a picture of our son when he was a baby, followed by a text that said things were good back then. For the first time, I didn't respond. I looked at my phone and felt nothing. No anger, no hope, no sadness, just emptiness. It was in that moment that I realized something. I wasn't the one who needed to hold on. She was the one keeping me in this limbo, not because she loved me or wanted to fix things, but because she needed me as her backup plan. I was her safety net, her emotional crutch when things weren't going well with him. Every time her new relationship hit a rough patch, she'd reach out to me, trying to reignite the flame she had doused long ago. She wanted to keep me close enough to use but far enough to never actually commit again. And I had let her. I had been a willing participant in my own suffering, too blinded by the past to see the truth right in front of me. That realization changed everything. The manipulation wasn't working anymore. I finally saw it for what it was, a way for her to control me, to keep me tied to her, even though she had already moved on. And I knew in that moment that I was done being her pawn. I had been kind, understanding, and patient for far too long. I had begged, pleaded, and tried to reason with her, but it was all for nothing. She wasn't going to change. She was never going to come back. And more importantly, I didn't want her back anymore. Something inside me shifted that night. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but now it had a purpose. Now it wasn't just a blind rage. It was fuel. I knew what I had to do. I needed to take back control, not just of my emotions but of the situation. She had been playing games with me for far too long. It was time for me to flip the script. Revenge wasn't something I had ever seriously considered before. But now, in the quiet of my apartment, with the realization that she had used me over and over again, a plan began to form in my mind. It wasn't enough for me to move on. I needed her to feel the consequences of her actions. I started by thinking about what mattered most to her over the years. I'd watched her jump from job to job, never settling for long, always blaming others for why she couldn't make it work. But one thing had remained constant: her obsession with appearances. She cared more about what people thought of her than anything else. Every decision she made, every move she took, was calculated to project an image of success and happiness, even if the reality was far different. That was my way in. I wasn't going to attack her directly. Instead, I was going to dismantle the life she had built for herself, piece by piece, starting with her reputation. It wasn't enough for her to leave me and move on with him. She needed to believe that the world was still on her side. She needed to maintain the illusion that she was the victim, that she had made the right choices. But I knew the truth, and it was time to expose it. I started small, reaching out to his ex-wife, who had been supportive since the affair came to light. We'd exchanged messages on and off, venting about the betrayal we'd both experienced. But now I had a purpose for our conversations. I began planting seeds carefully. I didn't have to lie. The truth was more than enough. I told her how my ex had cheated on her new man again with me, and I showed her the text as proof. His ex-wife was furious. She had already been dealing with the fallout from their affair, and now she had more fuel to throw on the fire. She was the perfect ally, someone who was just as invested in seeing their relationship implode as I was. Together, we started spreading the word, subtly at first, about the true nature of their relationship. His ex-wife let slip to a few mutual acquaintances what was really going on, and soon enough the whispers began. Meanwhile, I kept my distance from my ex. I went no contact, cold and unresponsive to her texts and calls. Every time she reached out, trying to rekindle some sense of control over me, I either ignored her or gave her short, uninterested replies. I knew it was driving her crazy, but that wasn't the point. The point was to make her realize she had lost her grip on me completely. But the real blow would come from within. I knew she was still cheating on her new boyfriend, sneaking around behind his back, just like she had done to me. Old habits die hard, and she was nothing if not predictable. But this time I wasn't going to sit on the sidelines and let it happen. I was going to make sure that the house of lies she had built with him came crashing down in the most public way possible. The opportunity came about 2 months later. It was my weekend with the kids, and I had them over at my place. When I got a text from her, "I miss you," she wrote, followed by a picture of our youngest in the yard. Typical. But then came the real request. She wanted to talk later that night, after the kids went to bed. I knew exactly what she was suggesting, and as much as the old part of me wanted to respond, the new part, the part that had grown stronger, colder, saw this for what it was. Another chance to use me. So, I played along, agreeing to meet her at a familiar spot, the hotel we used to go to when we needed a break from the kids. But I wasn't going there to rekindle anything. This wasn't about us anymore. It was about her learning the hard way that actions have consequences. I had already tipped off his ex-wife, who, in turn, had let him know that something was going on that night. She didn't have to do much. The doubt was already planted in his mind, and he was more than willing to take the bait. That evening, I waited at the hotel. I wasn't nervous. In fact, I felt more in control than I ever had. She arrived first, as expected, trying to act casual as if this wasn't just another act of betrayal in her long line of deceit. We talked for a bit, superficial pleasantries about the kids, but I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out when she could make her next move. That's when I saw his car pull up. Her face froze when he walked into the room. His expression a mix of confusion and anger. He had figured it out. The look on her face was priceless. The shock, the sudden realization that her carefully orchestrated lies had just blown up in her face. She tried to backpedal to explain it away, but the damage was done. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The sight of him standing there, realizing that the woman he had left his family for was no different than the one he had cheated on, was enough. I watched as he stormed out of the room, leaving her standing there, dumbfounded and alone. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace, not because I had hurt her, but because she was finally being forced to face the consequences of her actions. She had destroyed so much, not just between us but between our families, our children, and their future. Now she was reaping what she had sown. I left her there in the hotel, not waiting to hear whatever weak excuse she might come up with next. I didn't need to hear it. I had my closure, and from that moment on, I knew I would never be under her thumb again. She had lost the game, and I had won, not by begging or pleading, but by taking back control of my life. Word spread quickly about the incident. The man she had left me for, the one who she swore was different, better, was gone. After seeing her true nature laid bare, he didn't stick around to hear any more lies. I heard through the grapevine that he packed his things and moved out of his mother's place, distancing himself from her completely. She was left to pick up the pieces of her broken illusion, but this time, I wasn't there to help her. No one was, and that's when it all started to fall apart. Her carefully curated image, the one she'd spent so much time protecting, began to crumble. She had always been so concerned with how people saw her, always needing to be liked, to be the victim in any scenario. But now, people were starting to see the truth. His ex-wife, with whom I'd been in contact, made sure to tell everyone about the affair. She didn't hold back either. She shared everything, every detail of how they had both abandoned their families for some cheap affair, and how my ex had continued her pattern of deception and lies even after they had supposedly officially gotten together. The worst part for her was that his ex-wife had told their children. Suddenly, my ex wasn't just the woman who had cheated on me. She was the home wrecker who had broken another family apart. Friends and neighbors started keeping their distance. The sympathetic glances she had been used to receiving when she played the victim were replaced by whispers and judgmental stares. She hated being disliked, and now it seemed like the whole world was turning its back on her. I stayed out of it, letting the truth speak for itself. I didn't have to lift a finger. I had done my part, setting the wheels in motion, and now I was content to watch from a distance, as she struggled to maintain control over her crumbling world. But it wasn't just her social life that was falling apart. Her finances were in ruins too. For years, she had been reckless with money, always spending more than we could afford. Even after we separated, I had noticed the endless packages arriving at her doorstep when I dropped off the kids. Expensive makeup, new clothes, furniture she didn't need. She lived beyond her means, constantly complaining about being broke yet continuing to spend like someone with unlimited resources. And now, with her affair partner gone and no one left to blame for her problems, the financial strain started to catch up to her. It didn't take long for me to hear through our mutual friends that she was struggling to pay rent. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had pushed me to sell our house and move closer to him, leaving me to start over in a smaller apartment while she got to keep most of the things we had accumulated over the years. But now she was the one scrambling to make ends meet. I could have gloated. I could have thrown her struggles in her face, reminded her of all the sacrifices I had made for our family while she was busy sneaking around with him. But I didn't. I didn't need to. Watching her self-destruct was enough. It wasn't about cruelty or wanting her to suffer. It was about finally seeing the consequences of her actions come to light. What really pushed her over the edge, though, was when she lost her job. Apparently, her erratic behavior had caught up to her at work too. She'd never been good at holding down a steady job, always jumping from one place to another, blaming everyone else for why things didn't work out. This time, she couldn't hide behind excuses. She was fired for missing deadlines, calling out too often, and overall poor performance. It was the final blow to her fragile sense of stability. She texted me a week after she was fired, for the first time in weeks, desperate for some kind of help. She didn't say anything directly at first, just the usual tactic of sending old photos of our kids, trying to guilt me into softening up. "Remember when things were good?" she wrote, sending me a picture of us on a family trip from years ago. I didn't reply. I couldn't go down that road again. Every time I had allowed myself to respond to those texts in the past, I'd been sucked back into her orbit, manipulated into feeling like maybe, just maybe, things could go back to how they were. But I knew better now. Those days were long gone. She tried again, this time sending me a long, rambling message about how hard things were for her. She admitted that she was behind on rent, that she had no savings, and that she didn't know how she was going to keep providing for the kids. But her words were hollow to me now. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. I was no longer her safety net. It felt strange seeing her unravel like this. A part of me, the part that had loved her once, almost felt pity. But then I remembered everything she had put me through. The lies, the betrayal, the emotional manipulation. I had spent years fighting for our family, trying to make things work, only to be discarded like I didn't matter. She had chosen her path, and now, for the first time, she was being forced to walk it alone. It wasn't long after that message that she showed up at my door. I hadn't seen her in person since the confrontation at the hotel, and she looked different now, haggard, tired, like life had finally caught up to her. She wasn't the confident, manipulative person I had known for so long. She was desperate, and I could see it in her eyes. I know what to do," she said, her voice breaking. "I need help." I stood there, looking at her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel any pain. I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt nothing. "You made your choices," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm not going to help you anymore." Her face fell, and for a moment, I saw the realization hit her. I wasn't going to be there to pick up the pieces this time. She was truly on her own. "I did everything for us," she muttered, more to herself than to me, her eyes darting around like she was trying to grasp for something that wasn't there anymore. "I thought we'd be happy." "You did everything for you," I corrected her. "You didn't care about us. You cared about what you wanted." She didn't have a response for that. She just stood there, speechless, as I closed the door. In the weeks following her visit, something changed inside me. I had expected to feel empty or maybe even guilty for walking away from her when she was at her lowest, but that didn't happen. Instead, I felt lighter, like a weight I had been carrying for years had finally been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel angry or bitter. I felt free. The kids noticed the change too. My time with them became more relaxed, more joyful. I wasn't preoccupied with thoughts of her or what she was doing anymore. I wasn't checking my phone every few minutes, dreading the next manipulative message. I was present, fully there with my children in a way I hadn't been in years, and they thrived because of it. Their laughter came easier. Their smiles were brighter. They weren't caught in the middle of their parents' emotional war anymore. As for my ex, she faded into the background the more I distanced myself. The more desperate she became. But I stood firm, keeping my interactions with her strictly about the kids. No small talk, no late-night texts, no room for her to worm her way back in. It was a hard line and I held it. Her life continued to unravel, but I wasn't keeping tabs anymore. Friends would tell me bits and pieces. How she was moving from job to job again, how she was still struggling to pay rent, how her relationship with him had completely fallen apart. He had left town, apparently abandoning her the way she had abandoned me. It seemed fitting in a way. She was living the reality she had created for herself, a reality where no one was left to support her. It wasn't long before people started noticing the change in me. Friends who had seen me at my lowest, who had watched me struggle through the betrayal, were surprised by how different I seemed. I wasn't the same person anymore. I had been through the fire, and while I wasn't completely healed yet, I was well on my way. I was stronger, wiser, more sure of myself than I had ever been. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. I was out with a few friends, grabbing drinks at a local bar. It was nothing special, just a casual night out, something I hadn't done in years. We were laughing, talking about old times, when I noticed a woman sitting at the bar. She wasn't particularly striking in a conventional way, but there was something about her presence that caught my attention. I don't know what made me do it, but I got up, walked over, and introduced myself. Her name was Emily, and she had a warmth about her that immediately put me at ease. We talked for a while, nothing serious, just casual conversation about work, life, and everything in between. There was no pressure, no expectations. It was just easy. That night, for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt a spark of hope. I didn't know if anything would come of it, maybe we'd see each other again, maybe we wouldn't, but that wasn't the point. The point was that I was ready to move forward, to open myself up to new possibilities. As the night went on, I realized something important. I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I wasn't defined by her betrayal or by the years of manipulation and heartbreak. I was more than that. I had survived. I had grown, and now I was ready to start living again. Emily and I exchanged numbers that night, and while I wasn't in any rush to jump into anything serious, it felt good to have made that connection. It felt good to know that I could open my heart again, even after everything I had been through.